morning, my friends, and welcome to another elemental installment of Cowboy State Politics. From very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Monday morning. In a much anticipated announcement, well, anticipated from my point of view anyway, Representative John Bear has finally announced that he's going to seek another term in the House of Representatives from House District 31. There had been some rumblings that perhaps he would seek a seat in the Wyoming Senate. I thought that Representative Bear would be a pretty good fit for Senate District 23, which is currently held by radical environmentalist and chronic leftist Eric Barlow. And for all of you that are currently afflicted with Freedom Caucus derangement syndrome that only listen to this program to find out if I'm going to say something that you could use against me, Eric Barlow is not a conservative, nor has he ever been. Now, as it turns out, Abby Angelos is going to run for Senate District 23. She will be a huge improvement to Barlow. So that put Representative John Bear out of the mix. And while I didn't have any doubts that he would run for re-election, it took him a while to announce, and he did so, and he's going to do so this morning on this program. And actually, I guess that his written announcement came out on the Open Range Record early this morning. So technically, I guess we announced it there first, but the first time that he's going to talk about running for re-election is going to be here in just a second. But before I get there, let's get a word in from our sponsors. Today's installment of Monday Reload is brought to you by the Buffalo Wool Company. I know, the weather's warming up. Thank God. I was so tired of it being 80 degrees in the middle of winter. I have to tell you, my friends, this winter has been nothing short of schizophrenic, which is all the more reason why you need a couple of pairs of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep your feet cool and dry on the hottest of summer days. And if the weather goes back to snowing on Memorial Day weekend, they'll keep your feet nice and toasty warm, and you can still wear a pair of tennis shoes with them. Go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. So this morning, I sat down with Representative John Bear to talk about his re-election campaign. Here's our discussion. Joining me on the program is House District 31 Representative John Bear. John is also the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, and he's decided he's going to run for re-election. So welcome to the show, John.
Thank you for having me, David. It's great to be here and really excited about announcing here on your show my candidacy for re-election to House District 31, and this would be my fourth term if I'm victorious.
All right, so 8 years in the House if you were successful. First question that comes to my mind is, there was some discussion, or maybe you could call it chatter, about maybe you might run for the Senate seat. So why did you decide to run for the House again?
Well, personally, it would have been good for me to run for the Senate. I like the idea of a 4-year term each time you run and representing twice as many people, my vote being worth twice as much really there in the legislature. But I struggled with it because, frankly, a lot of our leadership is leaving for the Senate. And so I really felt like for the body and the conservative movement in Wyoming, it was important that I stick around and help with that body and ensure that there's a continuous movement in the right direction for the conservative movement in Wyoming in the House of Representatives. And if I may, I'd just like to back up a little bit and just tell your listeners a little bit about myself. I know I've been on your show a lot, but, I'm a small business owner here in Gillette, Wyoming. I'm married to a wonderful wife named Sage. We have children and grandchildren here in Gillette, Wyoming, and we are really devoted to this community. My wife has been working just as hard as I have in the leadership realm in this city, trying to keep our library from sexualizing children And of course, I'm here working on those types of conservative things for the people of Wyoming. Have been for 6 years now. I was the chairman of the Freedom Caucus for 2 years while we really grew the movement in the Freedom Caucus to where we now have a majority in the House. We've accomplished some great things, and there's just a lot more to accomplish. So that played also into my my decision to stick around in the House and really work towards completing more of those things that the people of Wyoming are really looking for out of their representation. I sent you my press release, and I think the new message for this candidacy is pretty straightforward. It's, in a state with a bunch of rhinos, it's good to be a bear.
I love that line, by the way. All right, so why don't you just run through what your campaign platform is? What are the things that you want to work on? I mean, it's pretty easy. Hold on, just a second. It's pretty easy to just say, well, we're going to focus on the same things we've been doing. But I think that a lot of times voters get kind of, it's the same message over and over. And if I know me, I want to hear specifics. So what are the things that you want to work on in a fourth term?
Well, let me start with the things that would be more exciting to your listeners, and then I'll finish with the stuff that's really critical that I've already been working on and want to continue working on. And that's spending. And that's really less interesting to people, but it's just as important. So some things that we really need to continue working on that I want to have been on the forefront and want to continue doing that: election integrity. A lot more work to be done there. Things like ballot harvesting and unsecured drop boxes. We need to eliminate those types of things. More tax relief. We got 25%. We were fighting for 50%. It's going to be on the ballot. Maybe the people make some choices there that help. But ultimately, I consider property tax to be an unfair and unjust tax. Once a person owns their property, they really shouldn't have to continue paying rent on it to the government. And so we need to look for a different way to fund government, and I'm going to continue working on that. The intermediate step, I believe, is acquisition value, and more people are talking about that. And so I'd like to continue moving toward that with the goal, maybe it's outside of my time in the legislature, but eventually eliminating property tax in the state of Wyoming without adding some new tax like income tax or something like that. And I think it can be done, but the state, really has to put a lot of willpower into that effort. And there's some really intelligent heads got to get to working together to come up with the best solution for the state in the long run. And affordable housing, I brought a bill that really we fought to get out of the House because the Democrats tried to turn it into something else this last session to provide for better opportunities for affordable housing. One of the things that's happening is local governments are starting to add more and more fees onto building a new home or remodeling your current home. Same thing for business development. And I brought a bill that said, no, you can't do that. You can't take property away from a property owner without just compensation. You can't charge one homeowner for someone else's homes. All it does is add cost. It never solves the problem. We need to reduce the cost of housing, get more developers in here, trying to get more houses built. And as more and more industry comes into the state, which we're working on that as well, we'll see those housing opportunities for those the people who live here currently, get the cost of housing down lower, as well as any new move-ins that really want to find a job here in the state of Wyoming. And I believe that bill, had the Senate not torpedoed it by saying, they just didn't even want to take it up. After, many of the conservatives that were saying that actually admitted that this is very important that we do this in the state of Wyoming. I believe it would have reduced the cost of housing in Wyoming, developing housing, by at least 20%, maybe 40%. And that is critical. That's the kind of things that government can do and should do. It's really basically reducing regulation and the cost that government piles on to affordable housing. And also, I want to keep working on Wyoming's energy future. Been working against woke wind and solar that takes up our ag land, but also at the same time really championing coal, oil, and gas, which are huge here in my district. A lot of the people that I represent work in the coal, oil, and gas industries.
All right, let's talk about that affordable housing piece for just a second. I spoke to one of your constituents not that long ago. He's a guy that builds apartment buildings, and he flat told me that he's not going to build any more of them because he can't compete with government. And, there have been a lot of housing developments all across the state where taxpayers dump, a tremendous amount of cash into them, and they end up being owned by East Coast equity firms who, this whole thing, we call it affordable housing, but really that's just kind of a smokescreen because it never ends up being affordable. But wouldn't you agree, John, that the best way to reduce housing costs, building costs, we can make a list under that category, is just to get government out of the way? I mean, I don't see anywhere where it says government should provide housing.
Absolutely agree with you. And we can help with the provision of housing just by lowering the cost so that all Wyomingites can benefit from, the opportunities in Wyoming for good, affordable housing. And yeah, I championed that bill for that very reason. I know there's a lot of effort on the affordable housing side where it's really become a welfare for the well-connected. And if you look at my record, especially at this last session, I really championed the idea of the government of Wyoming getting out of the business of corporate welfare, corporate cronyism. We've got a long ways to go. And I was not successful, even though I stood up and voted and got several other legislators to vote with me against this ever pervasive, just funding particular businesses and tipping the scales so that, if you're connected to somebody in the legislature, boy, you're going to get a great deal, but everybody else has to compete against that. And it's not fair. It's not constitutional, in my opinion, and it's certainly not the American way. I'm all for America first. Free market capitalism is the way we get there. And it really is one of those, this is a cliche, but, a rising tide raises all boats. And, every single person in America is wealthy by world standards. And why is that? Because we have one of the most free market economies in the world. But we keep chipping away at that. And there's far too many in Wyoming state government that would just as soon walk away from the free market idea and have government take over more and more of our lives. And I think if you just look at my battle on the one bill called the Wyoming Energy Dominance Fund, I tried to give on every reading another opportunity for the elected officials to reduce the amount of money or to restrict the money to those tax-paying entities that have paid into our state, like coal, oil, and gas. But no, we really continue to increase the amount of state funds, taxpayer dollars that are going to particular companies that, frankly, the taxpayers are not being benefited. In fact, just this last week, we had in my committee, the Joint Appropriations Committee, took up again the reformation of our Wyoming Business Council. And that's something that I need to continue being there and championing. There's many other people willing to fight on that front of getting out of the business of just handing cash to companies to try to get them to come here to Wyoming. And that's just not the right way to do it. We should be creating a great atmosphere of low taxes and low regulation that businesses want to come here, and they want to bring their employees here with them because we have great schools. And those are things that we want to continue working on. I've been on the recalibration committee. First time in 20 years, we passed a recalibration bill, which the courts have demanded that we do, and making sure that our schools are funded properly. There's still a lot of work to be done there. There's a few little hiccups when you make a big change that nothing's changed in 15, 20 years. There's going to be some rough spots, and we need to continue working on that too.
Let's go back to that Wyoming Business Council piece, because your committee, appropriations, has had several committee meetings about those guys. Now, the narrative on the other side is that the Wyoming Business Council is Wyoming's #1 economic development arm. It's the engine of the state. Respond to that for me. Because I think that I've seen a lot of, pieces about how great the Wyoming Business Council is and how terrible you guys are for opposing it. So respond to that argument.
Well, let me get a little history. You mentioned it, but the effort during the 2025 budget session was to completely eliminate the Wyoming Business Council and just start over with something new. And why do you do that? Well, if you're a winning football team at some point, and then you become a losing football team. You don't keep the coaching staff around. You change things up. You really start from the ground up, and they call it a building year. Well, that's what we need to be in right now. But instead, the Senate chose to keep that entity. So now we're in a reformation. We're going to reform this thing and try to make something better out of it. It has been reformed before in its 30-year lifespan. The question I would ask, the same one that Thomas Sowell would ask, show me the data where this is really successful. And we looked at the data just this last Thursday, and some of the things that led to the creation of the Wyoming Business Council are things like young people leaving our state and lack of manufacturing jobs. Well, we looked at the status of those issues in 1997 when the legislature was studying it and saying, these are the metrics that we want to look at and change. And guess where we're at 30 years later, David?
Same place.
Exactly where we started. And we have spent about $1.5 billion with this entity trying to move the needle. And, you could say businesses have come here, but then the question is, was it really because the Wyoming Business Council? I could tell you the ones that they gave cash to, probably so. But a lot of those have been failures and have left the state after failing and left a lot of unemployed employees around. It was interesting during the discussion, one government entity came on to support this Wyoming Business Council. You got to love it when one government entity is there to testify on behalf of another.
Oh, of course.
But it was the airport development board. And they were saying, hey, we really need the Wyoming Business Council to make our airports vibrant, and we all work in a symbiotic relationship. Probably true, but that gentleman that was in charge of that board was from Rock Springs, and I said, hey, in Rock Springs there happens to be this bank building that we the state have put about $5 million into, and now it's still boarded up. We're going to sell it to somebody for $500,000 after we've invested $5 million, and they're going to have to dump a couple $1 million into it. Hey, what do you think? Would that $5 million have helped the airports out? And it was interesting. He said, well, in self-preservation, he couldn't answer the question.
Right.
So, so we've got a lot of failures that were wrapped around the axle on. And, when you look at the balance, failures to successes, I've asked for those successes, and I'm just getting kind of some anecdotal things. And I don't think on balance, the government is ever going to be successful. All we're going to do is chip away at that free market that Adam Smith said that invisible hand of the free market has the greatest chance of being successful.
Okay, let's talk energy for a minute. I mean, you're from Campbell County. Campbell County is Wyoming's number one energy producing place in the state.
We are the energy capital of the nation.
Very much so. Now, you mentioned the energy dominance bill, and I read that thing, and it appears to me that it is more, essentially, those funds are going to go to larger companies that, are probably already established, that have a huge bankroll, that can set up operations. But there are a lot of producers, maybe not coal mines, but certainly oil and gas. There are a lot of producers that are smaller, that are, independent outfits. Some of them might have just a couple of wells. So what can be done in the legislature to move from helping out companies that, frankly, don't really need all that much help, and supporting those energy producers that are independent, that are, just trying to develop energy, on their own? What can be done with them?
Well, I don't want to get too complicated here, but let's look at what happens between big companies and small companies when it comes to lobbying with the government. Big companies can afford lobbyists. They come in and they say, hey, we want more regulation. We want it because what it does is it creates an opportunity for them that the small operators cannot afford. And so they are pro more regulation because it gives them basically a monopoly. And I think that legislators need to be cognizant of that it's the small mom and pop entrepreneurs that are out there every day pushing to make the nickels and dimes work, that hire the majority of the people that live in the state of Wyoming. And we need to support them. So your question is, well, how can the state legislature do that? I really believe number one is pushing back on the federal government, buying into these big companies and adding regulation, but also we can do that at the state level too. We need to be cognizant of everything we do. Is this being supported by the industry simply because big companies want to have a monopoly and knock the little guy out? And I think you see that on a lot of levels, even at the state level. And I think we can work against that propensity to follow. You get down in the legislature, and guess who you don't hear from? You don't hear from those people who can't afford to have their own lobbyists there on their behalf. We don't hear from the citizens, the taxpayers, and we certainly don't hear from those small 1 or 2 oil rig businesses that, the family business that's trying to make a go of it. And so I'm certainly cognizant of that. I've worked for some of those small businesses, and I understand their plight, and certainly want to be a champion for the small business as well as the big business. They all will benefit from reasonable regulation and low taxation.
All right, let's talk some social issues. You mentioned that you were the chairman of the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, and a lot of the charges against the Freedom Caucus are that you guys just focus on national hot button social issues that really none of that stuff really happens in Wyoming. So first, that's not true. But second, talk to me about the issues that the Freedom Caucus supports on, I guess, social issues.
Well, we just got the majority in the election of 2024, and we began governing in 2025, and we only had 1/2 of 1/3 of the government as far as what we were able to influence, and that's the House of Representatives.
Coming up, John is going to describe exactly what the 5 and dime plan was. But before we do that, a completely outrageous exposition of pure capitalism.
Are you watching what's happening in our country and asking, what can I do? Join the John Birch Society in Salt Lake City, June 6th, for a powerful one-day conference. The day includes a host of respected speakers, 2 meals, and meaningful connections. You'll gain clarity on the issues and walk away with practical steps you can take to your community. Reserve your seat today at jbs.org/SLC26. That's jbs.org/SLC26.
The following ad was paid for by Brent Bean for governor.
You won't find him leading a horse out of a barn or leaning against a corral with the sun setting behind him, because Wyomingites don't need a candidate who creates a good photo op. What you will find is a hard-working, experienced leader who believes Wyoming should always come first. A conservative grounded in strong values and steady principles. Ready to lead Wyoming the right way. Brent Bean for governor.
Today's program is also brought to you by Morton Buildings. If you're in the mood for any type of building on your property, whether it's a garage or a barn or maybe a roping arena or a giant warehouse for your business, the 2 guys you need to talk to are Marcos and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Every time you listen to an episode of Cowboy State Politics, do me a favor. Make sure that you like and share it and leave me a review anywhere that you get all of your podcasts. I know. Everybody says that, but it actually does help grow the program. So if you could do that for me, I'd really appreciate it. And now, back to the program.
In that 2025 session, we brought what was called the 5 and dime. And these were those social issues. It was protecting our borders by not authorizing driver's licenses to be valid from other states that were issued to illegal aliens. And it was for reducing that tax burden by 25% across the board and permanent. It was for election integrity. I personally sponsored the SAVE Act. Wyoming was the first state to require proof of residency, proof of citizenship to vote or to register to vote in the state. That's been obviously a big battle at the national level, but it was a big battle at the state level because, frankly, though my constituents really want to be able to trust that their vote's going to be counted, there's certainly an element out there that is voicing the Democrat mantra that you're being an impediment to people being able to vote. But let's face it, everybody's got an ID. It's ridiculous in 2026 to say that anybody can't vote because they're required to show an ID to do so.
It's pretty
so
insulting
those kinds of basic things like keeping boys out of girls' sports. And that's just so common sense on so many levels. We had our speaker before we took over said, hey, it's just not happening in Wyoming. 3 months later, the stories are in the headlines. It's happening, where parental rights are being trampled on, and kids are being basically transitioned in school without their parents' knowledge. Things like that have been happening in Wyoming. They're not national issues. And I'll tell you, we were sensitive to that criticism that we were only dealing with national issues. We felt like we'd heard that on the doorsteps when we campaigned. And many of our members, actually, I think all of our members go door to door and campaign and talk to their constituents. We also do a lot of town halls. And so that's where we were getting the information. But just to be sure, we spent a lot of money on a statewide poll. What were the people of Wyoming's highest priorities? And that's what led to the 5 and Dime. It was called the 5 and Dime because it's 5 most important things that the people of Wyoming wanted. We wanted to get it done in less than 10 days. And we did that in 8 days. In the first 8 days of the House of Representatives, we got all those passed. Eventually, all 5 of those issues became law, and so we're just super excited about that. Some other things were things like school choice and pro-life legislation. We've been champions of that, and a lot of that stuff's gotten tied up in courts. We've been very critical of the judicial system. That's another thing we need to continue working on: judicial reform. The state of Wyoming should look like the people of Wyoming, and it should be conservative. It should present those values. But we continue to see the courts trying to move us into this blue state status by striking down laws that the elected representatives of the people have brought forth. And so we're going to continue working on those things. One thing I didn't get to, I said that I was going to mention the boring stuff, and that's the budget. Lots of media on the budget this last year. In the end, we really didn't cut that much, but I would say what we did do is we held the reins back real hard and kept spending from getting worse than it would have been had we not been there. But I would like to continue reducing that expenditure ramp, if you will, that we're on. I don't think government should grow any faster than your paycheck grows. And that's my goal. And as the chairman of appropriations, I'd like to continue in that role so that we can continue to really get our grasp on what we're spending money on and try to reduce this growth in government that has outpaced people's paychecks.
All right, let's just, since we're talking about boring issues, and frankly, I don't think that government spending is all that boring to people.
Because it's so critical. It's so important. And that's why I was so excited that the media really jumped in and looked at it. They did so in order to attack us for actually having the audacity to reduce spending when we had a surplus of funds. That's the time you want to reduce spending. If you can control it when you've got a lot of money, it's a whole lot easier to keep it under wraps when you get into financial trouble. Should the oil industry, go in the tank? Should coal continue to suffer the war on coal battle and those types of things? It's always risky in a state where you're so dependent on minerals for our revenue.
All right, so let's talk about the actual budget. So the Senate came out with a budget that was, and forgive me if I don't know the exact numbers, but it was slightly higher than what the governor had requested. So then, the House has their version. Then you guys go to the conference committee and you make a deal. So there's this narrative that, well, you guys just capitulated to everything that the Senate did. I mean, why even have a House? You just do whatever Senator Nethercott says. So where exactly were the numbers?
Well, first of all, we went in, according to media reports, and they're not far off, at a $480 million reduction from the governor's budget. That was the budget that was presented on the House and Senate floor. The Senate immediately immediately just said, we're throwing that out. We're going with the governor's budget. So if you want to talk about abdicating your responsibility, that right there is doing just that. Let's not even have a legislature if we're just going to do the governor's budget. And then they proceeded, as you mentioned, to add money to that. So they were 53 million above there. We started out at that 480, and we debated for over 40 hours. We added an extra day to the legislature on a Saturday to continue debating that through 3 full readings and 40 hours of debate. And we came out 170 million below the governor's budget. We went to that conference, remember, 53 million above in the Senate, 170 million below in the House. And we ended up with an agreed upon deal at 143 million below the governor's budget. So I would say, anytime I get 80% plus of my position, I probably won in the negotiating battle. And that's exactly what I've been trying to tell the public against this narrative that we caved. I'll remind the people that, even Steve Harshman, after seeing our final budget in the House of 170 million in the Senate's position, said, this should only take about 5 minutes to work out. Well, it took a lot more than that. Just the meeting to discuss in front of the public all the things that we agreed upon took 2 hours just to go through all that. But it was a long meeting of us, working out those differences. But we came out at a much better position. Now, I will say that the governor vetoed a lot of those reductions, and we were unable to override those vetoes because, frankly, this majority that the Freedom Caucus has brought to the House and the people have provided us with their votes, it's just a simple majority, and you have to have 2/3 to override the governor. So there's still far too many RINOs versus bears in the legislature.
Fair enough. So do you have an opponent that's announced for your district?
I did, and he has since stepped down. So there's always rumblings. There's when you make the kind of impact that I have in the legislature, you draw a lot of fire. Not much of that fire is coming from within my district. Most of it is outside of the state, let alone outside of my district. And I expect, these big PACs to come in and fight against me, things like Pfizer and the governor's PAC. I think the governor, would clearly like to keep people like myself out of the legislature. So I expect a lot of things like that. There's been a huge expenditure of an attack on me right now, coming from what I believe is the Democrats. They've probably spent about $100,000, and it shouldn't cost more than about $10,000 to $15,000 to campaign for a seat in the House. And these people spent about $100,000 trying to attack my credibility, my personality. And so really we've we've stirred up a hornet's nest, if you will, and it's going to come with a lot of attacks. So I really need to get the word out to the people of what the truth is. I'm fighting for them. I'm trying to reduce their tax burden, trying to keep the cost of government, down so that government doesn't grow any faster than their paycheck, and create an economic atmosphere where jobs are abundant and their children can stay here in the state of Wyoming. So we're working on all of those fronts, and it's going to be a battle during this election season. So I do anticipate if they can find somebody to run against me, they will. And I intend to get myself back into the legislature and continue leading. And I hope that the good people of Wyoming, again, will provide us with that majority in the House of Representatives where we can continue the good work for the people.
All right, John, I think I've kept you long enough today. If people want to get hold of you, how do they do that?
Well, you can call me on my phone number, which those attacks have been putting that out there, and I haven't got many calls off the attacks, but keep that out there.
Thanks for the advertisement.
307-670-1130, 307-670-1130. Also, I have a website, John Bear for Wyoming, and that's johnbear4wy.com. And then you can always reach me on Facebook, John Bear for Gillette, and I do a lot of work on Facebook where you can kind of see what I'm working on, what I stand for. And I've been awarded a lot of awards for my conservative voting record, and been a leader in the House of Representatives in that regard. So just would like to continue doing that for the people of Eastern Gillette, House District 31.
All right, John. Well, I appreciate it. Good luck in your race, and I'm sure we'll have you on again before the primary election.
Well, thank you, Dave. And David, keep up your good work. The people of Wyoming need a real, true voice for conservatism. You represent far more of the people than many of the other media outlets out there, and I just want to keep you encouraged. Love the fact that I'm bringing my my announcement to your show first, and appreciate your getting that out there to the folks.
Well, thank you very much, John. That'll do it for today's installment of the broadcast. Have a good week, and we'll talk again on Wednesday. Don't forget about the live program, which is broadcast every Tuesday through Friday, beginning at 8 a.m. You can watch the live show on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble. For now, my friends, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.